Imagine this. For 45 years, the entire world held its breath. Two massive superpowers, armed with enough nuclear weapons to end civilization, squared off in a global struggle. This is the story of the Cold War, a conflict that, weirdly enough, was never fought directly. But its shadow? Yeah, it's still hanging over us today. So picture this. World War II has just ended, the dust is barely settling, and then Winston Churchill comes out with this bombshell of a warning. He talked about an iron curtain coming down across Europe, and he absolutely nailed the new reality. The world was split in two, with these superpowers on a collision course. And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, that's the central question we're going to try and unpack in this explainer. How in the world did the United States and the Soviet Union go from fighting on the same side to being locked in this decades-long standoff that basically reshaped everything? Okay, so how did it all come to this? To really get a handle on the Cold War, we've got to go back to the very beginning, to the completely different ideas and experiences that forged these two superpowers. At its absolute core, the Cold War was a massive clash of ideas, two completely opposite ways of seeing the world. You had American capitalism, which was all about free markets, individual rights, and then you had Soviet communism, which put the state and the collective good first, with a single party controlling everything. They were just fundamentally different. And these huge differences in belief, they were poured gasoline on by what each country went through in World War II. The Soviet Union lost, can you even imagine? 27 million people. They were absolutely determined to create a buffer zone to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. The US, meanwhile, came out of the war as a global economic giant, convinced it had to step up and lead to stop another world war. So, as the Soviets started to spread their influence in Eastern Europe, President Truman basically drew a line in the sand. In 1947, he laid out the Truman Doctrine. This was the policy of containment, and it would shape U.S. foreign policy for the next 4 decades. The goal was pretty straightforward. Stop communism from spreading, period. So now we have this new containment policy. And it wasn't going to be long before it got put to the test. Not in a direct fight, but in these brutal proxy conflicts around the world that pushed everyone right to the edge. And that first big test? It happened in Korea. In 1950, the Soviet-supported North invades the US-backed South. The war that followed was just a brutal, bloody mess that pulled in the US and China and cost millions of lives. It was a huge, stark reminder of the human cost of this new kind of war, and a terrifying peek at what could happen if the big guys ever went at it directly. Meanwhile, the nuclear arms race is just spinning up like crazy, and out of that comes this terrifying new kind of logic. It was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. Yep, MAD. And it's as crazy as it sounds. The idea was that if both sides could totally obliterate each other, then no sane person would ever push the button. And when we talk about the scale of these new weapons, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. The Castle Bravo H-bomb test in '54, it was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that flattened Hiroshima. Not twice as powerful, not 10 times, 1,000. Suddenly, MAD wasn't a theory anymore. It was a terrifying reality. Right, so all this tension, all this nuclear buildup, it all comes to a head in 1962. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev secretly puts nuclear missiles in Cuba, just off the coast of Florida. His argument was basically, hey, you've got missiles pointed at us in Turkey, we're just giving you a little taste of your own medicine. And for 13 days, just think about that, almost 2 weeks, the entire planet was on a razor's edge. Everyone was watching this standoff over Cuba, knowing that one wrong move, one little miscalculation, and that could have been it for everyone. In the end, a mix of back-channel deals and maybe a little bit of luck pulled us back from the brink. So after staring right into the nuclear abyss, both sides kind of took a big step back. And this kicks off a new, really complex phase of the Cold War. It's weird because on one hand, you see this easing of tensions, but at the very same time, the deadliest proxy war of the whole era is about to explode. Yeah, this period got a name. Détente. Leaders started talking more. They set up a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow, and they even signed arms limitation treaties called SALT. Basically, it was an attempt to just manage the rivalry, to keep things from boiling over again. But here's the crazy part. While the leaders are talking peace, the deadliest conflict of the Cold War is raging in Vietnam. And this was totally new because for the first time, the war was being beamed right into people's living rooms every night. This created what people called a credibility gap between what the government was saying and what people were seeing with their own eyes. The result? A deeply divided country and a protest movement that changed society forever. The cost in human lives was just staggering. Over 3 million people died. It's a number it's just hard to process. The war left this deep scar on America, shaking people's trust in their government and in the country's whole mission in the world. So while the West is dealing with all this protest and division, what's happening behind the Iron Curtain? Well, the Soviet Union is hitting its own wall. It was called the era of stagnation. The economy just ground to a halt. I mean, store shelves were often empty, corruption was everywhere, the whole system was just rotting from the inside. So you've got this 1-2 punch, right? You have all this external pressure from the West, and then this internal decay and rot. And that combination, it's going to lead to a surprisingly fast and incredibly dramatic end to the whole thing. All right, fast forward to the 1980s. Ronald Reagan's in the White House, and he decides to go all in. He ramps up military spending and announces this futuristic missile defense system, the one everyone called Star Wars. Now, a lot of it was a bluff, but it totally worked. It panicked the Soviets, whose economy was already on its last legs. They just couldn't keep up. And then, everything changes. A totally different kind of leader takes over in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. He knew the system was broken, so he rolled out these two huge new ideas: perestroika, to try and restructure the failing economy, and glasnost, which means openness, to let people actually talk and criticize. He was hoping he could fix things from the inside. But here's the thing. Gorbachev thought he could control the reforms, but what he really did was open Pandora's box. The Chernobyl disaster happened, exposing just how sick the system was. And then, boom, 1989 happens. Peaceful revolutions just sweep across Eastern Europe, and then the Berlin Wall comes down. It was all so breathtakingly fast. There was one last gasp from the old guard, a failed coup in 1991, but it was over. On Christmas Day, of all days, Mikhail Gorbachev went on TV and resigned. The Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the very last time, and just like that, the Cold War was over. So that's the story of how the Cold War began, how it played out, and how it ended. But it leaves us with one last big question to think about. The Soviet Union is gone, sure, but did the tactics of the Cold War, the proxy wars, the disinformation, the nuclear saber rattling, did any of that ever really go away? It's something worth thinking about.